Hello, everyone. My name is Alec, and welcome to Yarns of Yore. This is a podcast where I, your host, regale you with tales of magic and adventure from the land of Shad, all written by yours truly. The stories are meant to be comedical in nature, inspired by podcasts such as Tales from the Tavern or fantasy fiction, as well as TV shows such as Adventure Time. I try not to take myself too seriously on this podcast, and I encourage you to do the same. So, without further ado, let us step into the world of Shad and Yarns of Yore. Shad was home to many mysterious mysteries and magical wonders. There was the Forever Hole, a hole which went down forever. Many tried to find the bottom, but none have returned. There was Bum Lake, a lake which, if you looked at it from above, looked like a giant sat down there and left a big old butt indentation on the ground. Did that actually happen? Who knows? But few places were as magical as the enchanted forest of Elderoth. This place was so freaking magical that plants and animals talked, the flowers had healing properties, and sproutlings sang songs and played harmless pranks on travelers, like hiding their socks or replacing their toilet paper with poison ivy. The forest was home to many types of people: wood elves, gnomes, dryads, nymphs, treants, a few humans, and fairies, who all lived together in peace and harmony. Except for that time Riddlewick the gnome forgot to return the lawnmower he borrowed from the Wood Elf King, and that time those fairies that were still in Fairy College panty-raided the nymphs, and the time the elven orchard workers went on strike because the treants added an extra 4 hours to their shifts, arguing that elves could afford it because they only needed 4 hours of sleep. But otherwise, the forest inhabitants got along just fine. Anyway, Whistleton, the Gnome King, was taking a walk through the forest when he heard the clanking of armor. Curious, he waddled over to the sound, peering behind a bush. What he saw was one of the most horrifying things one could ever see in the enchanted forest of Elderoth. Lumberjack knights, and they were chopping down the trees. Whistleton ran out toward them, holding out his arms. "Stop!" he said, standing in front of a tree and spreading out his arms. "Oi!" said a lumberjack knight. "Just what do you think you're doing?" "Good lumberjack knights, you can't chop trees here," said Whistleton. "This is the enchanted forest of Elderoth. Did you not hear the first 2 paragraphs?" "Bugger off, gnome," said another lumberjack knight. "We're busy." "I warn you, if you chop the trees here, you'll be sorry," said Whistleton. "It is forbidden to do so, as per the Treaty of Elderoth, which states that all the good kingdoms of Shad are to preserve this enchanted and sacred place."
"Oh, that treaty is centuries old," said one lumberjack knight. "Besides, we're under orders by King Torvin to chop this whole place down so he can build a mall."
"A mall!" exclaimed Whistleton. "Can't he just chop down a forest no one cares about or something?"
"Just scram already, gnome, or chop you too,"
said another lumberjack knight as he swiped with his axe. Whistleton ducked, scurrying away from the lumberjack knights as they continued to work. Word of the lumberjack knights spread quickly throughout the forest of Elderoth. No one knew what to do. At first they just sort of stayed home and hoped they would go away, but that didn't really work out. So the people of the forest started protesting the presence of the lumberjack knights, holding up signs that said, "Save the trees," and "No malls here," and one elf just held up a sign that said, "Sample text." However, the lumberjack knights just ignored them, continuing to raze the forest with their axes, bulldozers, and giant buzzsaw machines. The denizens of the enchanted forest had tried everything they could think of, but the lumberjack knights just kept chopping away. Eventually, all the rulers of the denizens of Elderoth got together for a council meeting. There was Whistleton the Gnome King, of course, Oakbristle, Lord of the Treants, Woodstone, King of the Wood Elves, Elia, Queen of the Dryads, Darren, the human archdruid, Nivania, queen of the nymphs, and lastly there was Lydia, the fairy princess. All the rulers sat around a table, discussing what to do about the lumberjack knights.
"These lumberjack knights are a problem," said Woodstone the Wood Elf King, pounding his fist on the table.
"I was taking a nap when one of them started trying to chop me down," said Oakbristle, Lord of the Treants. "It really hurt."
"We have no choice," said Darren the Archdruid. "We must declare war on the lumberjack knights." Everyone gasped.
"But that would stain the forest with blood," said Whistleton. "And do you know how hard blood is to get out?"
"I agree with Darren," said King Woodstone. "If we continue to do nothing, the forest will be no more, and that damn mall will be built upon its ashes."
"We can't possibly stand up against the lumberjack knights," said Elia, Queen of the Dryads. "We have no army. They'll chop us down, grind up our bones, and make pancakes out of us." She was right. The people of the Enchanted Forest were peaceful people, with no soldiers or anything like that. They knew nothing about fighting. Surely, then, this was the end of the Enchanted Forest. Everyone bowed their heads, solemnly, figuring it was hopeless. "Hello there!" came a voice. The council members looked around for the source of the voice, but couldn't find it. "Who's there?" asked Whistleton. "I say, hello there!" came the voice again. Jumping out of the brush as trumpets blared were 4 adventurers. There was a halfling male with a longsword, a human female with leather armor and a giant axe, a human male with a cloak and bow, and a wolf. That's right, a wolf, and he had armor and a sword. The council members gasped. King Woodstone fell over in his chair. "Who are you?" asked Elia. "Top of the morning to y'all," said the halfling. "I am Tevius Wildberry, the halfling warrior."
"I am Tabitha the Berserker,"
said the woman with the axe, cracking her knuckles. "I'm Woodroar Hawkridge, the ranger wizard hybrid," said the man with a bow. "I have infinite magic arrows." Tevius pointed to the wolf. "And that's Silverfang." Silverfang gripped his sword in his teeth, growling like he meant business. "We're here to help you with your lumberjack knight problem," Tevius continued, putting his fists on his hips and tightening his butt cheeks. "You mean you're going to help fight them?" asked Lydia. "But how? There's only 4 of you and 100 of them." "Then you guys will have to fight too," said Tevius, "and we'll show you how." Training montage. Tevius, Hawkridge, Tabitha, and Silverfang began teaching the denizens of the Enchanted Forest how to fight. Tevius and Silverfang showed them cool sword moves. The forest denizens didn't have swords, though, so they just used really sharp sticks. Next, Hawkridge told them how to make bows and arrows and shoot them. They were really bad at it at first. One wood elf knocked an arrow, drew it back, then shot his bow instead. A gnome somehow shot his arrow backwards, but over time they got better at it, and they were crack shots. Tabitha taught the forest people about good health practices, like getting plenty of exercise and having a balanced diet, because those are just important lessons to live by. One treant rose his hand to ask her a question, and Tabitha straight up proceeded to suplex him for no apparent reason. Over time, the people of the Enchanted Forest got better and better at fighting. The sun set on the training montage, and the montage music, which was Thunder in Your Heart by John Farman, BTW, faded out as we cross-faded into the next scene. At the dawn of the next day, the lumberjack knights were doing what lumberjack knights do. A good chunk of the Enchanted Forest had been felled at this point, leaving mostly just tree stumps and dug-up earth. The lumberjack knights sat around a makeshift camp they had assembled in the area, and were eating pancakes, eggs, sausages, bacon, bran flakes, baby deer brains on toast, and orange juice. Part of this complete breakfast. One lumberjack knight with a brown scruffy beard and a knitted hat was sipping coffee and looking at the news on his phone. He rose his coffee mug to his mouth, leaning his head back to down the rest of it in one gulp, when an arrow flew through the air, went straight through his throat, exited out the other end, and left a hole in his throat. Blood and coffee poured out of the wound as he gargled and died. The other lumberjack knights looked up from what they were doing and saw the adventurers from before running out to meet them. "We're under attack! To arms!" shouted a lumberjack knight who jumped in his giant buzzsaw machine and drove it forward. Tevius and Silverfang went to town with their swords, chopping at the lumberjack knight's kneecaps. There was one lumberjack knight who had a chainsaw sword. He ran up to Tevius and brought it down on him. Tevius rose up his sword and blocked the attack, sparks flying everywhere as their blades locked. Silverfang came up behind the chainsaw sword lumberjack knight, jumping up and spinning like a top. The wolf cut the upper half of the lumberjack knight's head, and he fell over, dead. The lumberjack knight in the giant buzzsaw machine was driving it towards Hawkridge. Hawkridge took aim and shot him in both eyes. He screamed. Blinded, the lumberjack knight started driving his buzzsaw machine all over the place, sawing many of his fellow knights in half. Blood, gore, and lumberjack knight halves went flying all over the clearing. Tabitha was cutting down lumberjack knights left and right with her giant axe when the most jacked, swole, and muscular lumberjack knight you ever did see stomped up to her. He wore a horned helmet and wielded a double-edged axe. He took a bottle of maple syrup and downed the whole thing, pumping himself up. Tabitha reached out, grabbed his face, tore it off, stuffed it in her mouth and chewed on it, spit it back out, and put it back on the lumberjack's head upside down. The lumberjack knight stood there in shell shock, then walked away from the battle, never to be seen again, because what does a man do when that happens? It seemed the adventurers had the upper hand, when suddenly the earth shook. Everyone turned to see lumberjack knight giants coming in over the horizon. They entered the battlefield, and they started messing things up right quick. They tore the trees out of the ground and threw them like javelins. The adventurers gathered close together, brandishing their weapons at this new terror. But then the sound of a war horn rang throughout the air. A slew of arrows flew out from the forest canopy, peppering the lumberjack knights and giants and turning them to pincushions. Someone yelled, "Charge!" and the denizens of the enchanted forest rushed out into the battlefield, wielding spears and really sharp sticks and taking them to the lumberjack knights. Wood elves, druids, gnomes, fairies, dryads, nymphs, and treants went to town on the enemy army. One gnome got so pumped that he bisected a whole giant in half with his stick. The battle raged throughout the whole day, with many casualties on both sides as the sun sank into the horizon. Soon the battlefield was littered with blood, arrows, and corpses. The sun rose again, and the battle was still going on, with treants wrestling giants and wood elves shooting arrows. Even the forest animals got in on the action, with elks and deer impaling lumberjack knights on their antlers. "Enough of this," said Darren the archdruid. He rose his wooden staff and started speaking in an ancient druidic tongue. The wind started whipping around really fast. Lumberjack knights, giants, wood elves, druids, treants, nymphs, gnomes, dryads, fairies, and everyone else looked to see a freaking humongous tornado that was made of wind and lightning and had glowing eyes coming in over the horizon. The tornado caught the lumberjack knights and giants and absorbed them into itself, spinning them around and electrocuting them at the same time. Many lumberjack knights tried to run for their lives, but none could escape the tornado's incredible power as it wreaked havoc on the entire battlefield. After 5 long minutes, the tornado dissipated. Not a single member of the enemy army remained on the battlefield. Darren the archdruid lowered his staff and sighed contentedly. All was still and quiet. The adventurers and the forest denizens all exchanged glances. There was a long, tense silence. Then everyone jumped up in the air and cheered. There was a freeze frame, and everywhere you looked started playing as the scene slowly faded to black. The following night, a great celebration was held in honor of the brave adventurers who came and taught the denizens of the enchanted forest how to fight and saved it from turning into a mall. There was music, dancing, and lots of wine and food. Each of the 4 adventurers were awarded a crown of leaves that made them honorary knights of the enchanted forest. There was a shot of the adventurers, and Silverfang howled triumphantly. Then the credits appeared really fast and suddenly, and cool music started playing. The end. This concludes today's story. If you've made it this far, thank you. If you like what you heard, please consider subscribing and giving a like and a comment if you haven't done so already. Once again, thank you for listening, and I will see you, hopefully, someday soon. Goodbye.